Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Conspiracy Con. You've already heard my announcements, and at this point we are going to introduce our first speakers. Some of you know them, some of you may know of them, of their work, of their experiences. It is an honor for me to get to know them, for me to introduce them to you, to have them here to share their story. Mark Phillips and Cathy O'Brien have been through a lot. Cathy has had some extraordinary experiences in the mind control program, and I will let them elaborate on what that is and what that means. They have authored a book called Transformation of America, keyword trans. I think most of you in this room understand what that means. Mark came along and pulled her out of this situation, a situation that most of us would never even want to wish on our enemies, I think. And this is their story and their uphill battle to inform the public. I don't want to take any more of their time. I'm going to let Mark lay out the details. He will speak first and then bring on Cathy. So without further ado, if you will please give a warm round of applause to Mark Phillips and Cathy O'Brien.
Well, good morning. I can't really see that well because of the lights, but it's a welcome opportunity for Cathy and I to be out here with you all. And quite honestly, this is one of our favorite parts of the world to visit. How many of you in this audience, if you don't mind me asking, know that someone could control externally a mind? Wow. Okay. How many of you in this audience understands the fact that most people in the federal prison system are in there for one charge? Most people. The most successful prosecution of any particular criminal charge, this particular one puts more people in prison than anything else. Conspiracy. Conspiracy. Yes, it is a conspiracy that will get you more time in a federal prison than anything else. And more people are serving time in a prison system, in our federal prison system, because of being convicted of being involved in a conspiracy. When in fact, we that are called conspiratists, in other words, persons who are exposing conspiracy, are related to publicly and through the medias many, many times as having some sort of problem in our personas, or that we are lying somehow if we are exposing the very ones that are locking people up for this charge. One point that I would like to drive home, and I'm just here to introduce Cathy O'Brien. But I also would like to give you all one message that is deeply embedded in everything that we are and everything that we say, and that is hope. And this hope is not just based on the fact that a few people may get out and do something. You people are doing something right now by being at this conference. This is a very, very important conference. We've got some really old friends who are speakers at this conference, and we're seeing a lot of faces at this conference of the participants who we've known from other conferences. This is quite the opportunity to rekindle some of those old friendships. Now, taking you back in time a bit, Adolf Hitler assigned his right-hand man, Eichmann, to research the multi-generationally abusing families of Northern Europe. What Adolf Hitler envisioned to be the ultimate weapon was not the atomic bomb, not weapons of mass destruction. Adolf Hitler was an expert at psychological warfare. Those V-2 rockets that he absolutely just pounded Great Britain with, he put whistles on them so that people would hear them coming in. And each time they heard a whistle, they knew there was going to be an explosion right afterwards. This was a very important factor to beat down the people's morale, to make them want to give up. I've often said if Adolf Hitler had had television at his fingertips, things would have been very different. The Nazis would have indeed acquired a very different position in history, when in fact Adolf Hitler, when he had Eichmann and Himmler researching these multi-generational abuse family pods, he was looking at some extraordinary things. He was looking at what the results are of the psychological traumas, sexual abuse, as well as some extraordinary physical abuse by these families on their own children before the children were age 5, before their brains had a chance to form. This was outside most people's realm of understanding. It was outside of most people's realm of even knowledge, for that matter, because these groups were very secretive. They were, some of them labeled themselves as being engaged in witchcraft, others just blatant Satanism, and they were incorporating blood traumas. They were incorporating food, water, sleep deprivation. But the most horrendous of them all were the parents of these children sexually abusing their own. A child doesn't, before age 5, certainly doesn't relate to sex as any sort of a emotional outlet of pleasure. A child whose brain is not yet formed, who is being literally abused to the point of what the child thinks is death before age 5, begins to develop some extraordinary defense mechanisms. Dissociative identity disorder is what it's professionally labeled. At one time they called it multiple personality disorder. Not too long ago. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We only have one persona, one personality. That personality can be fragmented, it can be shattered, it can be professionally compartmentalized to where we have all sorts of projections of other personas, but basically there's only one personality. Well, this is what Adolf Hitler was interested in. Adolf Hitler was indeed the one individual who had the largest pool of human guinea pigs that's ever been known on this planet. The work that he was wanting to accomplish for his, quote, New World Order, and George Bush and Clinton, everybody else will use the same term. Actually, they all stole it from Nero. What they were actually looking for was to understand from a clinical perspective how these offspring who were being sexually abused, psychologically abused, and physically abused, of course, were developing 44 times visual acuity. That's like having eyes in the back of your head. 44 times improved visual acuity. Well, now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist, pardon the pun, to understand how this could be applied in special forces, how it could be applied to soldiers who were in missions that a normal soldier could not possibly walk away from. These guys could. These children had 44 times visual acuity improvement. They also had photographic memories. Now, everyone in this audience has got a photographic memory. Some of us just don't use the camera very often, but nevertheless, we've all got it. I'm one of those folks, too. By the way, Cathy and I don't prepare our presentations. I've never used notes, except when somebody wants me to announce something. It's very easy to tell the truth over and over and over and over again. It's very easy to answer questions as long as you answer them truthfully. Well, that would have bothered Adolf Hitler quite a bit, because he believed that the ultimate weapon would be the control of the minds of the people. And he didn't want people to be able to tell the truth or to know that they were lying. What he wanted was to be the puppet master for his New World Order's politicos that would control the various regions on this planet. I don't see that there's much difference in what Adolf Hitler planned in this New World Order scenario than what's going on right now. Jumping forward in time a bit, when Cathy and I first started out on this whistleblowing trail, we were told not to use the words mind control, call it behavioral modification. Well, that's what I had to call it when I worked for the intelligence community in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't called mind control. It wasn't referred to as mind control. It was referred to as behavioral modification. I didn't hear the words New World Order when I was working. But I was told when Cathy and I first started out that we couldn't use that term, that that was a conspiracy nonsense, there was no such thing. And then when George Bush stood up on television and said, this is the beginning of a new world order, that was all I needed to hear. And then I heard the admiral in charge of SEAL Team 6 stand up on the Discovery Channel and say that he answered only to the President of the United States and the New World Order. That documentary is available. And I would like to be able to afford to at least have that clip and send it to all the people who said there was no such thing as New World Order. When Adolf Hitler began to research the findings and he began to apply some of these things on people, he began to understand the gravity of if you control the person's mind, then you control everything. Freedom of thought is mankind's last remaining freedom, and it has been eroded seriously just in the last few decades, more seriously than ever before. It used to be that religions control the people in a type of what I call soft mind control. And then it became, if it was hard mind control, they called them cults. Now, all of us are subject to soft mind control. All of us have had it applied to us because our history books, for instance, have been changed. Our newspapers and our other forms of news and information are greatly spun and changed so that we do not get the truth. If we don't get the truth, but we think we're getting the truth, and we're predicating all of our thoughts, our actions upon what we learn, but what we're learning is controlled, contrived, this is mind control. This conference should be 100 times the size that it is. It should be like one of these major football games or baseball games. But no, the people who think they're free and think that they have freedom of thought are attending those games by the tens of thousands. And guess what? You guys are the ones that are actually enjoying the remnants of freedom of thought. And it is you all that are going to take some of this information away from this conference, and you're going to spread it around. Cathy and I have never advertised our book. We've never solicited ourselves, and we have never allowed any group or organization to support us. It has been a dreadful trek through hell. All because I happened to be in a very odd, unique situation at one point in my life, and I became privy to what Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler had worked so diligently on. There was a project that was born the same year as the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which actually was just a changeover from the OSS. That was called Project Paperclip. Project Paperclip was the importation legally of Nazi and fascist scientists into this country. And most people would think, oh, they were rocket scientists. There were about 600 or 700 odd propulsion scientists, engineers, like Werner von Braun and his team, that were brought over to the United States on this Project Paperclip that was sanctioned by Congress. Of course, Congress said, okay, you can bring over these people, because if we don't contain these folks, our enemies, like the Soviet Union, and by the way, I never saw them as an enemy. I just saw them as people literally in a race, a technology race with us. So Congress allowed the importation of these people to be put into our higher institutions of learning, within our military-industrial complex, within transportation, and within communications. And of course, they were brought in to build rockets. No, it didn't stop there, because there were 600-odd psychiatrists and psychologists that had been engaged in mind control atrocities and mind control research for Adolf Hitler. The United States government deemed that so secret that in 1947, same year that Project Paperclip was born, the same year that the CIA was born, the same year Roswell occurred, 47 was a banner year. They launched the National Security Act. And that is what Cathy and I are all about. We want to see the repeal of the National Security Act, because you folks are going to hear something right now that you're not going to like. There's not one person in this audience, not one, that could not legally be experimented on, killed, or financially destroyed, and you have no recourse legally, none, zero, as long as the National Security Act is in place. The National Security Act has not guarded our nation's secrets very well either. The rules of ethical military conduct had done a remarkably good job for years and years and years. No problems. But the National Security Act came along, and the string of espionage problems that occurred and the cover-ups that ensued is nonstop. And I'm going to tell you how that National Security Act has played in turning someone who used to be highly paid to keep his mouth shut, who now works for nothing, just enough to keep talking. Yeah. I was very fortunate. I did not have to go to Vietnam, get my head blown off, or wind up coming back home as a headbanger. I was very fortunate. I didn't want to flee to Canada. I just simply wanted to serve my country in some capacity. And so I thought, well, I was relating to some of the old World War II ideas where women were working in the factories building airplanes and bombs. I thought, well, you know, why can't I build something or do something other than go over there and get my head blown off? Well, I didn't have an appointment to West Point or anything that would keep me in university or college during that period of time. I was going to college, to night college. But I was given the opportunity to go to work for a company based right up the road in Redwood City called the Ampex Corporation. Ampex Corporation invented the instant replay. They had developed videotape, and they were the foremost military-industrial complex provider of the most extreme technologies in recording ever known to man. And I was given a job to keep me from being drafted by the Ampex Corporation as an engineer. Well, obviously, there are a lot of folks in here that know who I am. And by the way, we want to get to know who you are, so you've got the advantage on us. Come by and talk to us later. But those of you who know me know that I have trouble balancing the checkbook. I'm dyslexic. I couldn't be an engineer if my life depended on it. But I nevertheless had that title. What I did in the mid-'60s and late '60s and early '70s was I just was in charge of maintaining, not the physical maintenance. I had an actual, real, honest-to-God engineer with me at all times. But I worked in mental institutions, both state and federal. I worked in the state and federal prison systems, worked on NASA sites, and was working to just simply guard the integrity of certain file tapes and films. Those file tapes and films were on what we called behavioral modification projects. The scientists that I knew, some of them admittedly were former admitted Nazis, but they were just doing what they liked to do. And what I saw them doing in the '60s and '70s, I truly believed then, and I truly believe it now, was benevolent for society. You know, anything that could be used for positive can also be used for negative. A knife, for instance, is a device that allows us to use it as a tool or a weapon. Mind control, the one I was seeing, the behavioral modification programs, particularly in the prison systems and in the hospitals, the people were either incorrigible, they had extreme, I mean, we're talking the Charlie Manson types. These people had extreme social problems, put it mildly. They had behavioral problems. Some of them were cannibals. Some of them were serial killers. Some of them weren't any of those things, but they could not function in society. And what I was seeing were these people being free of those extreme mental bonds. People were recovering from the unrecoverable. People were becoming functional when they absolutely were non-functional. So myself and the scientists that I was rubbing elbows with, we all believed that this was one of the greatest opportunities for emptying out our prisons, for emptying out our mental institutions by the year 2000. We literally were working towards that goal. Sure, we would have a prison system, but they would actually be for rehabilitation rather than just caging people. I truly believe this because I never saw any trauma-based mind control or behavioral modification being applied. What I saw were benevolent. They used drugs, hypnosis, very mild electroshock, about like taking a 9-volt battery and, wetting a place on your arm or your leg and putting it on you. I mean, you can feel a little tingle, but it's not the electroshock that most of us equate where they're trying to treat schizophrenia and other things. There's a huge body of evidence that says that electroshock therapy is just that. I strongly disagree. I have never seen it work for the benefit of the individual. And I didn't see any of that type of electroshock. What I did see, though, was people recovering. Now, the worst part about it was most of them could not be released. That was the only thing that I saw that really hurt me. They could not be released back into the populace because of their crimes that many of them had committed, and society would not allow that. And the government could not admit to these people being totally recovered. So unfortunately, these people remained incarcerated. Well, these scientists working on this project, by the way, the project name was officially born in 1953, some 64 months after the National Security Act was passed, when the Central Intelligence Agency became a funded organization, and when something landed in Roswell. All of these things that were happening made me believe that mankind was truly evolving. I recently was given what is known as a plum. Someone in Langley was kind enough to send me something that I was scared to even put on my computer. It was a set of 4 discs. These discs cover the MK Ultra projects, all of them, from 1953 until 1973. These discs contain 1.2 gigabyte of some 23,000 files. The names of the people who were being worked with, experimented on, were blacked out. That's all. The rest of the project information is there, believe it or not, intact. It's not redacted, for the most part. I hadn't even gotten through them, all the files yet. It would take me a year to read all that stuff. But I did find some extraordinary information in it. And Cathy and I are putting these things available. I only had about a dozen of them I could bring to this conference. A dozen copies. But we feel like what Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler were putting together to control the world. If we permit people to actually see for themselves what our government has now declassified and made available, we felt like that maybe, just maybe, that with enough voices, this situation can be reversed. I still believe this. I believe that the good guys outnumber the bad guys 5 to 1. I could be a little bit off. It could be the other way around. Because like I said, this has been a walk through hell, because after I left the Ampex Corporation, I was recruited. I won't take you through my entire employment history, but I worked for Laser Systems and Electronics as their medical sales manager. I was vice president of marketing and sales for Laser. Laser was the first, that was a group of NASA scientists. These guys are paid off with technologies when they retire. And one of them was given some laser technology. And he was the first man to bounce a laser off the moon. And he was also very interested in a device called, that incorporated telemetry. Telemetry is the wireless transmission of something, whatever. In this case, it was body functions, brain waves, heartbeat. And back in those days, this was in the early 70s, they didn't have anything in the hospitals for cardiac patients who were recovering to monitor their heart unless they put them in a bed and you run all these wires to them. Well, psychologically, that was killing more of them than it was actually helping. So this new telemetry device, about the size of a small package of cigarettes, could fit in the patient's pocket, and the patient could go all over the hospital because there were antennas buried in the ceilings. When in fact, just a few years earlier, all that technology was classified, top secret. And then when NASA decided that they could help their position it publicly, they released it. They don't release any technologies unless it feathers somebody's nest. What I was seeing in the 70s was 25 years ahead of anything. Now I understand it's gone off the scale. I've had the luxury of meeting some extraordinary people, engineers, working within the military-industrial complex at this time on experimental propulsions. It's not even experimental anymore. I've had the opportunity to discuss in depth some of the things that, the experiments that I was privy to see what happened to them. Where did they go? How were they developed? And they too had been developed for decades. Because you see, after leaving Ampex and working my tenure with Laser Systems and Electronics, who, by the way, pioneered brain implants. That's a really touchy subject with me. Most people hollering about they've got a brain implant for mind control. Well, first of all, they wouldn't know it. Second of all, they don't need to do that. I wish they did. I wish that was all I wish they really needed to do a surgical procedure to put one of these things in you, or at least inject it or something. But they don't need implants. They haven't needed implants since 1983. That's scary stuff when you consider the ramifications of what is now possible through compressed microwave and any number of other advanced technologies for controlling your thoughts. Creating apathy, rage, can easily be done with what is known as the Heart Project. And it can be done over vast areas of the planet simultaneously. This is old Tesla technology that most of you folks in here, I'm sure, are aware of. But I'm also hoping that you're aware that the heart operations were shut down for a period of time during the Clinton administration. And it restarted in August of last year. And they're building these things all over the planet. This is a form of the type of mind control that Hitler hadn't even thought about. This is the worst. Because there is no shielding. You can't be a privileged person and avoid it. In the mid-'70s, I was approached after I left Laser Systems and Electronics by a fellow friend of mine who'd kind of been hanging around me for all my career. He always seemed to direct me in the right places, and I always seemed to wind up with incredible professional job opportunities. And I told him that I could not ever work in a medical field because I don't like blood product, and I sure don't like to see brains. And I couldn't stand it. I mean, I literally passed out in an operating room one time watching a simple brain surgery. They were trephining this boy's head. He had a pressure on his brain, and when they got that little drill in his head, the thing just blew out and splattered me. That did it. I hit the floor. And I didn't eat for several days. Thank God I wasn't fond of organ meat, or I'd never been able to touch it again. But I did tell this friend of mine, I told him, I said, I don't care what it is, I just don't want to deal with the medical profession, and I've got all these job offers from Johnson & Johnson, and Codman and Shirtland, and the list goes on. I said, I can't handle it. I said, I don't care about the money, I just can't handle it. He said, well, what about transportation? I said, okay. So he said, well, I'll send you to a place called Smyrna, Tennessee. I said, that's the only thing there is an old military base. He said, well, that old military base is owned and operated now by the city of Smyrna, which is a population then of about 1,200 people. He said, but the interesting thing is, he said, the world's largest supplemental airline is based there. And you know some of the people involved with that airline. I said, oh, sure, that's Capital. Capital International Airways. Born in 1947. Hey, what a coincidence. And oddly enough, they were born in Virginia. Oh, boy. Well, I didn't really consider anything other than the fact that they were a large supplemental airline, and I was a marketing guy, so this would be a great opportunity, and I interviewed. And when I interviewed with the senior vice president and the president, Mr. Jesse Stallings, I left there wondering what I had just interviewed for, because they didn't outline my job description. They only were interested in how much money I wanted. That's it. And they wouldn't tell me what my job was going to be. And I didn't even know what I was interviewing for. They told me to show up for work Monday morning, and I did. They didn't even have an office for me. And so I politely asked Al Pittman what I'd be doing. He said, you're going to be in charge of advertising. Oh, okay. That's a lot of money to pay an advertising manager. That's okay. He said, no, you're director now, and we're going to promote you to vice president. Of course, that's kind of like a bank. Everybody's a vice president. In the airline business, if you're in upper management, everybody's a vice president. There's no great distinction. So I said, well, that's great. He said, well, I'll introduce you to your employees. Well, I worked for Capital. And then one day, federal marshals descended upon the building in 1976. I was going to Washington to a big gala affair for the Travel and Tourism. Donna Tuttle, who was undersecretary under Jimmy Carter, had invited me up, and I was being honored for my contributions to U.S. travel and tourism. I thought it was kind of nice until the U.S. Marshals came in, and they briefly asked me, by holding up a paperclip, what did I know about this? Well, I'm not real slow, but I told them, I said, I use them every day. I said, I got big ones, little ones, and I said, we've also got plastic ones. Well, oddly enough, He said, "That's all I need to know." I thought, wow. I had some friends of mine that were U.S. Marshals, and that was back in the days when all they did was transport prisoners. And I used to play poker with them. That's when I lived in Atlanta working for Ampex. So I knew where their hot buttons were and what to say and what not to say. And so I asked the guy, I said, "This is not consistent with the guy's level of intelligence. Why aren't you asking me about paperclips, man? Why don't you ask me about the real meat and potatoes, like my fountain pen?" I said, what is this all about? He said, you're all need to know, and that's all you need to know. He said, "You obviously don't know anything." I said, "You got that." He said, "We're going to put you in charge of the integrity of all the files in this building." I said, and why? What's going on? He said, "There is a federal charge that's being levied against Capital International Airways and its executive officers that will have to be addressed in Congress because it's a matter of national security." Well, putting me in charge of the integrity of those files was very much like handing or putting handcuffs on me and putting a big block of cheese and putting me in that in a little box with that big block of cheese, and I'm handcuffed, and you turn 15 rats loose, and I'm supposed to guard that cheese? I knew I was going to go to prison, and probably for the rest of my natural life that I'd been set up. Well, I went in and I expressed my opinion to my boss. He said, "You don't have anything to worry about." I said, "Oh, yes, I do, because I happen to know that somebody just broke into one of the files, and they said that I'm going to prison. Whether I tell them or not, I'm still going to go to prison." He said, "You're not going to say anything." And he said, "We hired you because you know how to keep your mouth shut." I said, "Well, I thought," I mean, kind of insulted. I said, "I thought you hired me because of my abilities." He said, "That too, but you can keep a secret." I said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave this country. Can you keep a secret? Because I'm going to tell you where I'm going. And I'm going to steal one of your airplanes to go there." He told me, he said, "Now, wait a minute. Don't even start that kind of dialogue with me," or something to that effect. And berated me. And he said, "You wait out there in it was the boardroom actually attached to his office." I'm sitting there, and my boss, Jesse Stallings, picks up the phone and calls a fellow by the name of Richard Nixon. Oh, boy. I mean, this is really getting serious now. Really, really, really getting serious. I thought, well, life as I know it is over, and I don't even know why. I left that office, and he called me back up, and he said, "There's a U.S. Marshal coming out here to take the seals off all the files. It's over. Forget about it." I thought, Jesus, all I got to do is get out of this company. I got to get away from it. And I had people telling me all the time I work for the CIA. I said, "Of course I work for the CIA, you moron. Capital International Airways." I said, I don't work intelligence anymore, because I started out with Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA. I said, I don't do that anymore. I work for Capital." They said, "Well, okay, whatever you say, but you still work for the CIA." I said, "How do you know?" They said, "Because I work for the CIA." I said, "Well, I heard that many, many times, and I never believed it." Moving forward in time a bit, I had the opportunity to go into business for myself when I found out for a fact that I was working for the intelligence community, and nobody leaves the intelligence community. It's like the mob. You don't just say goodbye. You don't just say, "I'm going to go and do something else." You have to go to work for yourself, and you've got to make sure your customer base, whatever business or services you're providing, doesn't get put in one little corner with one large customer. I knew these things. So I decided I would get into my own business of consulting within the travel and tourism industries. I did very well at it. and I enjoyed myself very much until one day in 1986 I was contacted when I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, by an old friend of mine I had severed communications with years previous because he and I had gone our separate ways. I thought he was a redneck. He owned a plumbing company, and I just never really wanted to spend any time talking to him or being with him because he and I couldn't communicate anymore. We'd outgrown each other. He contacted me and he said, "Mark," he said, "I've been reading about you in the newspaper for years, Nashville Banner in Tennessee," and he said, "I guess your daddy got you in there." I said, "Oh, no. No, my father worked for the newspaper." I said, "No, actually, he was rather surprised that I got honored by anybody or anything." He said, "Well," he said, "you're doing a lot of international business. I've got an opportunity for you." So he introduced me to a guy who was supposed to be a country music entertainer, MC, stage hypnotist, really sleazy dude by the name of Alex Houston. He was a ventriloquist. God, wouldn't you hate to be the dummy on his lap? Whew. Alex Houston was indeed one of the sleaziest people I've ever had the misfortune of knowing, because I was taught neurolinguistics, the language of the unconscious, language of the subconscious. And I also was taught handwriting analysis and graphology. I had all the tools of being able to determine whether or not someone was being honest with me, whether they were a threat to me, or whether I could do business with them. And Alex Houston was somebody I could do business with, but I had to maintain control. He had a great idea, which took me and him to Hong Kong, and we started a joint venture company with the People's Republic of China. We were building these giant capacitor banks for energy savings so that the Chinese mines wouldn't have to shut down. It was at this juncture that I began to learn that I truly enjoyed what I had been doing, and that was negotiating international business deals. In 3 weeks, we put together $31 million worth of business with the Chinese. And I was, and with Alex Houston, 51% owners of a company called Uniphase Corporation. I didn't want to socialize with Alex Houston. I hadn't met his wife or his daughter. And then when I went back to China for the final deals, and we were building a huge plant over there, 65,000 square foot plant to manufacture these capacitors, I was approached by a Chinese intelligence officer. Oh, I failed to mention that my partner in Hong Kong was a fellow by the name of William Yoon. He was an arms dealer, major for the Chinese, and he owned a ship line. He distributed silkworm missiles all over the world. He was a nice guy, in spite of his work, and I trusted him. So when I was approached by a Chinese intelligence officer, this was in 1987, and this guy told me that he needed to speak with me because there was a serious problem. I thought that serious problem was I was fixing to be thrown out of that company, because now that they had literally all my knowledge and everything that they wanted, then they no longer had any need for me. But that was not to be the case. This Chinese intelligence officer began unfolding some things that I had never seen before. See, I was raised in an upper middle class family. Some would call it wealthy. I wasn't familiar with incest. I wasn't familiar with horrific tortures and child abuse to that nature. My father was very abusive, but nothing to compare to what I would later learn. I knew a little bit about the Heinrich Himmler studies and what had gone on in Nazi Germany with those people, but I just didn't equate it is going on in the United States. And this Chinese intelligence officer began showing me my classified files, still classified. Still classified. Now, this really scared me because you got to remember, you can take the boy out of the CIA, but you can't take the CIA out of the boy. And I was going to run straight home and tell, which I did. But let me tell you the rest of it. He also began impressing me with some of the most horrible stuff I had ever seen in my life. He explained to me that Alex Houston, my business partner, had to be removed from the company because he was involved in child pornography. White slavery. He just said slavery. And by the way, child pornography is punishable by death in China, first offense. A lot of things are, but they particularly don't like that one. He was also engaged working for the Central Intelligence Agency. This fellow had indeed shown me some of the most horrific stuff I can imagine. He showed me a picture of Alex Houston having sex with a small child. And that child turned out to be Haitian. He explained to me that I had to get rid of Alex Houston. I said, fine, I would. So I did. I went back to the States, and I told the Chinese if they were sincere, they'd give me the money to buy him out. They did. And I bought him out. And I went to see some friends of mine. Because this white slavery thing had other words like mind control attached to it. And he also told me, this Chinese intelligence officer, that Alex Houston was engaged in money laundering and illicit drugs, and it went all the way to the White House. I went back and began quizzing some old friends in the intelligence community who were still active, and they validated it for me. Well, by this time, I'd met Cathy and her daughter. I mean, we're talking a major airhead. Major. And by the way, no one escapes mind control. That's called abuse. Lots of people escape abuse. Mind control is just that. It's mind control. You don't know that you're being controlled. Of course, Cathy didn't even know her own name. She didn't know how old she was. She didn't know where she'd been in her travels. So I was convinced that I would get them out and get them into therapy and go back to China and do my thing. So I asked some people that knew, and they gave me codes, keys, and triggers. I applied them. They worked. I got her out, her and her daughter. And guess what? Everything in my life flipped upside down. All my bank accounts were gone. Everything that I had, gone. And they did the stupidest thing. They threatened me. And they had the sheriff of my county, who was a friend of mine, to deliver it. And he told me, he said, Mark, he said, this is CIA crap. He said, I would strongly recommend you just walk away from this right now. Well, I convinced them that I had lost my mind, and I walked away from it by taking Cathy and her daughter to Alaska. That same organization that was responsible for her victimization, I knew good people were in there. They provided me the technological antidote, because I was certainly not in any position to deprogram anybody. I'd seen it done, but I didn't know how to do it and didn't pay that close attention. So I had to do it. And as a result of that, you're going to hear probably the most incredible, validated story that is going to soon be a major theme in maybe more than one motion picture and a TV series, documentary series. After all these years, Cathy and I believe that this is our last year. And now I would like to bring up the person who is responsible for turning my life around. I wasn't ever a bad guy, but I I truly believed a bunch of things that weren't true. And now I know the truth, and now you will as well. If you'd please welcome the love of my life,
Cathy?
I'd like to thank every one of you for coming out here today. I've seen so many good friends and familiar faces and some new faces that are eager to learn about mind control. Knowledge is our only defense against mind control, and you certainly have a right to this information and it's your need to know. Mind control is the most important issue facing humanity today. All other issues, causes, choices, and electives are contingent upon our free thought. We all formulate our thoughts and our actions based on what we know. And we need to know that that knowledge base has been altered. It's been deliberately suppressed for decades. Superstition begins where knowledge leaves off. And superstition is so rampant these days that it's very obvious that knowledge has been suppressed for way too long. We've got to raise awareness. We've got to bring up our knowledge base. With knowledge our only defense against mind control, and awareness the only solution, we have a ways to go to realize what's happening in our society today, to know what we can do about the environment, violence, technological advancements, suppression of information, and what we can do to expand our own minds beyond what we thought we knew. So many times people feel like, oh, I've got the answer now, and wrap up all their knowledge and all their information and put it in a box. Knowledge doesn't fit in a box. It's not that simple. There's always more to learn. There's always more to know. And it's up to every one of us to be able to expand our minds and consider the reality that mind control is rampant in our societies and is affecting all walks of life. I'm extremely fortunate to have survived my MK Ultra mind control ordeal, to be lovingly rescued by Mark Phillips, deprogrammed, and reach this point and being able to speak out and tell you what I witnessed and experienced behind the scenes of what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed the New World Order. My experience as a mind control slave on a White House Pentagon level was extreme. I was totally robotic. I had no capacity to think for myself. I didn't have any free thought whatsoever. I didn't even have the ability to question, to reason, or consciously comprehend what I was involved in. With no comprehension, no conscious awareness, I had no understanding of time. I didn't know how much time was passing. I didn't know how old I was. And it certainly put me in a realm where I didn't have the kind of awareness necessary to be able to deal with the realities that I was experiencing. I've come a long way from the kind of robotic mind control that I experienced. And even though my experience is extreme and pretty horrific in many regards, the fact remains that mind control is a sliding scale. And we all experience some form of mind control or another, whether it's information control, that's absolutely controlling our perceptions, our abilities to respond, allowing for that superstition to creep in. And superstition so often renders us totally helpless to affect a situation. I'm very much a solution-oriented person. I definitely believe in solutions. And I spell solutions with an S-O-U-L. It takes soul, and it takes love, and it takes the ability to expand beyond what we thought we knew. The solutions are so exciting. I would much rather spend the whole time today talking about the solution aspect of it, because I'm real excited where we can go with the information that has been suppressed for so long. I believe we've all learned at some point, or been told at some point, that we use about 10% of our brain. That leaves a whole lot of our brain that we get to know about, that we get to learn about. The criminals in control of our government, in control of our information and our technology, have been suppressing the information on mind-brain function in order to control all of us by what we don't know. Secret knowledge equals power. And they're using that power to control each and every one of us, to put us in a position to have to rely on superstition. And when we rely on superstition, so often that puts us in a fearful position, and people get very fearful these days, when in fact we're right at a turning point, right on the verge of the most exciting and wonderful possibilities that humanity could ever face. I feel so fortunate to have come from the extreme mind control, to have seen what the criminals have been doing for decades and for generations behind the scenes of the political global effort, to see people beginning to wake up, to see the New World Order effort beginning to crumble to the point where these criminals are scrambling and working as fast as they can to make the difference while they can. They know that they're out of time. And now it's up to all of us to be able to grasp the information and spread the word, wake up our brothers and sisters, because this is our time and change is occurring. When we expand our thought, it's like we're opening our minds to a new dimension of thought. To be able to realize that we have within our own brains the capacity for self-healing, for discernment of truth. When we can discern truth, it's going to alleviate a whole lot of the problems that people are having dealing with fear and superstition and panic and everything else these days. When we can discern the truth, it will indeed make all of us free. We do have that capacity. We have a capacity to be able to stop the violence in the school systems, to stop the erosion of the planet that's happening right now. I'm deeply concerned about the ecological issues that are coming to light. We have the capacity to make differences for our planet and for our own selves, and to advance our own spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical evolution. This is a wonderful, wonderful time to be alive. But before we can implement solutions, the problem must be identified first, and it must be clearly identified. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, is what I saw, what I experienced behind the scenes of the New World Order effort, what is actually happening through the manipulation of the minds of the masses, the fact that so many people are under total robotic mind control in so many walks of life, from the intelligence community, politics, special forces, military, It's even in sports and entertainment. Mind control is very far-reaching, and the one that disturbs me personally the most, where my own passion is in the school systems, where our children's minds are being manipulated. Adolf Hitler said that if there were any free thinkers left in Nazi Germany, he was not concerned because he had the minds of the children through the education system. I heard that quote when I worked under Education Secretary Bill Bennett during the Reagan administration, and it was a plan that was put into place and being used in the school systems. It's one that's based on the same kind of concept that the military was conditioned with. It was determined that only 15% of the people could point and shoot at their enemy in a combat situation. 15% was not considered a sufficient number for the warfare that was being waged. So the military wanted to up that number, and the way they found to do it was to manipulate the minds of the soldiers to where they had to bypass that critical analysis, where there couldn't be that moment of thought that this is another human being, and what am I fighting for? You know, to bypass any of the kind of questions and critical thought that could come into play. So the military was programmed to bypass the critical analysis so that they could just point and shoot, point and shoot, point and shoot without thought, as though it's some kind of a video game. Notice the term video game. It certainly has a strong impact on our society as well, because that same technology, that same erosion of critical analysis has been put into our video games. And it's also been put into the school systems. The children have lost their ability to critically analyze. They've got information being pumped into their brains at a very, very rapid rate. They're smart kids, but they don't have the capacity and the ability to utilize the information in a creative and effective way. These kids, since they have lost their ability for critical analysis, are doing the same thing that military personnel do when they're turned out onto our streets without being deprogrammed. And we're having extreme violence in our school systems. We've got to understand what mind control is, how it works, and what we can do about it. For this reason, I'd like to talk briefly about what my experience is in MKUltra mind control and how it came to be. Because even though my experience is extreme, it certainly gives a clear picture of what mind control is, so that you begin to see how it's being used against all of us in some form or another. When I was a really young child growing up in Muskegon, Michigan, this would be the early 60s. I was born in 1957. My father had been sexually abusing me as far back as I can remember. And he often bragged of substituting his penis for my mother's nipple while I was an infant. What this did is create this idea in my mind, or change this whole sexual aspect in my mind to one of survival, akin to eating, drinking, breathing, because that's what that kind of childhood sexual abuse results in. So my sexuality was heightened from a very, very early age, and I also developed what is known as dissociative identity disorder. It was formerly termed multiple personality disorder, but has since been redefined because it's not multiple personalities, but the shattering of a personality and a compartmentalization of memory, of trauma, too horrible to comprehend. Childhood sexual abuse is certainly too horrible to comprehend. There was no place for that in my mind. It's not that I could morally judge my father, and it's not that I was just a little bitty kid. But what I was experiencing was the pain and suffocation of that kind of abuse, which caused this dissociative disorder. By the time my father was using me in child pornography at a very, very young age, and sending the child pornography through the local Michigan Mafia child pornography ring, mind control was already rampant in this country. Operation Paperclip had brought in the Nazi and fascist scientists. What the Hitler-Himmler research had revealed on multi-generational incest-based families was certainly a strong aspect of the kind of victimization that I and so many, many others went into. Because it had been determined that anybody that experiences horrible abuse will develop this dissociative disorder, which ultimately renders them helpless to affect the situation, change the situation, and makes a person very compliant. When my father sexually abused me, I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it at dinner, for example. I didn't think about it when I went off to kindergarten. I wasn't thinking about what my father was doing. As a matter of fact, I thought the whole world was that way. I thought it was some kind of a normal thing. Because it was happening all around me, I didn't know any different. So my brain actually compartmentalized the memory of that abuse, so the rest of my mind could function normally, and I could go out in society as a normal child. This is called the mind-sane defense to trauma too horrible to comprehend. And it's also why so many people are coming forth with repressed memories, usually around the age of 30, when the electrochemical changes in the body start bringing about changes in the neuron pathway firings of the brain and begin to open up the compartmentalized memory of the abuse that people experienced. I never thought to think about the sexual abuse of my father until he came in to sexually abuse me again. As soon as his pants would unzip, that part of my brain that knew how to deal with his abuse would actually open back up. The neuron pathways open up. So the part of me that knew how to deal with it would deal with it again as needed, however many times, however often, in whatever way. Then that part of my brain would shut back down so the rest of my mind could function normally. This is a part of our brain that we have a right to know about and a need to know about, that our brains can do something so phenomenal as actually shut down around memory of such horrible abuse. This compartmentalization of memory was what the government was interested in, because they figured that if a person couldn't think to bring to mind abuse, they wouldn't be able to think to bring to mind government secrets, government perversions, or anything else they wanted compartmentalized in the brain. For that reason, there was actually a criminal faction in control of our government that's in the same handful of criminals in control of our government today, and they're named in our book, Transformation of America, so you know who these criminals are. But it's the same handful over and over again. It's absurd that we let them stay in power. But nevertheless, the criminal at that time in my hometown area around Muskegon, Michigan, was a local politician by the name of Gerald Ford. This is the same Gerald Ford that went on to become the unelected President of the United States. He headed the Warren Commission that supposedly investigated the Kennedy assassination. Gerald Ford, at that time, was very much interested in mind control, so the local Michigan Mafia child pornography ring was actually being sanctioned. So if that kind of activity could go on, and they could target children like myself who were so horribly abused that they would be used in child pornography and would ultimately be suffering from the dissociative disorder they wanted to use in MKUltra mind control. The Hitler-Himmler research had found that children like that were absolutely ideal, and I was brought up accordingly. The Hitler-Himmler research had certainly expanded by the time that I was in MKUltra mind control, and it continues to expand to date. My own daughter, who was born into MKUltra mind control, unfortunately, I could not prevent her abuse. I certainly didn't contribute to it, but I couldn't prevent it. She was exposed to a high-tech form of mind control known as harmonics. And harmonics are very much affecting all of us and is an aspect of mind control that we need to consider and realize is reaching into our brains through music, and we certainly need to be looking at harp. Music has such a powerful impact on the brain because of the harmonics that carry the words into our brain, that oftentimes we'll hear a song and we'll reflect on, oh, I remember where I was at that time, and I fell in love at that time, and we have so many associations that go along with music because of the strong impact it has on our memories, because of the harmonic aspect. And that's just a small little tiny piece of the harmonic technology that they are using in MK Ultra mind control and that my daughter was exposed to. My victimization was strictly trauma-based, though. And when my father was caught sending us pornography through the mails, Gerald Ford approached him and told him that he could receive immunity from prosecution if he would sell me into the project. My father eagerly agreed. He was so happy about the whole idea and believed the government actually condoned child abuse that he went on to have 5 more children to raise in the project, so there were 7 of us in all. And he was never prosecuted. He remains free to date for reasons of national security. I think this begins to show clearly what has happened to our justice system. When we see gross and blatant violations of laws and rights occur in the court systems, particularly where children are concerned. I know right close to here you had a major occurrence going on with the Marin County Daycare Center because Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino was on the daycare board. The founder of the occult temple of Set that's proliferating on our military bases. Head of the Psychological Warfare Division of the Defense Intelligence Agency. One of my primary mind control programmers, and someone who doesn't religiously believe in what he's doing, but certainly understands that trauma, like sexual abuse of children, which he's, with the Presidio daycare scandal, certainly named him in, and occult trauma are certainly too horrible to comprehend. There's no place for it in a child's brain. In anyone's mind, for that matter. Good people don't think to look for that kind of criminal activity even because it's so horrific. Well, when my father agreed to sell me into MK Ultra mind control, he agreed to follow the instructions of the criminals that were going to raise me according to MK Ultra specifications. And he began subjecting me to occult trauma. He took me to Mackinac Island, Michigan, which is where the Michigan Governor's Mansion is located. And when I was a little kid, George Romney was governor at the time, and he was very much interested in mind control of the masses, not only through the education system, which ranked #1 in Michigan during the years that I was growing up, but also he was interested in taking what the Catholics had learned about the effects of trauma on the human mind into the Mormon Church. Now, I'm mentioning different aspects of religions, and I'm certainly not saying that all Catholics are bad or Mormons are bad any more than I'm saying that all politicians and all CIA are bad. There's good and bad in everything. And when we learn to open our eyes to reality and learn what the components are, we learn to start watching their actions rather than listening to their words. It's a lot easier to discern and to make free choices for ourselves rather than blindly following the paths that we're led down. But nevertheless, Romney was interested in the effects of trauma on the human mind and bringing it into the school systems. So I was often taken to Mackinac Island, Michigan, and it was there that I met who would become my owner in MK Ultra Mind Control. About the age of 13, I met U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd has been in office longer than I've been alive. That's kind of absurd in itself. I mean, that's a long time for somebody to be in such a powerful and influential position as Senator Byrd has been in control of our country's purse strings, deciding where money is going to be spent, where, how, why, and for ultimately what purpose. And his purpose certainly isn't for the betterment of this country or any of us. It's toward what Adolf Hitler and George Bush termed the New World Order, a robotic enslavement of society that is well on its way to that goal. Senator Byrd's position has been extremely influential for far too long. And any time he even makes a little slip of the tongue like he recently did on TV, making racial slurs and slams against humanity in this country, is usually just covered up and swept aside, and we're quickly diverted to something else over here, over there, something else in the media, because these guys are real good at pointing the other way and sending us in another direction. It's just like with music when they say, people protest lyrics. Oh, it's so evil and it's so... Well, it's horrible that they're talking about the kind of violence and the kind of shallow horrors that they are in music that absolutely should not be. But the problem is not in free speech, which is always stops any of us from making any progress in cleaning up the music situation. It's in the harmonics. The harmonics are what drives this information into our brains on such a strong level. My music was controlled under MK Ultra mind control. I was told what I could listen to. I was told what I could watch on TV. And the shows that I watched were ones that had subliminals in the backgrounds, high-tech themes that could be used and were used throughout my MK Ultra victimization, such as Disney themes predominantly and The Wizard of Oz. Those were some of the main ones. But by controlling my environment, they were controlling my information. They were controlling my perceptions. And their controls were closing in tighter and tighter and tighter on my mind, to the point where I lost my capacity to hope that there were good people in this world, that there was some place in the world where people didn't hurt each other, where I lost my ability to even think for myself, to reason or comprehend what was happening. By the time I was 19, I was thrust into MK Ultra mind control, worked on a White House Pentagon level during the Reagan-Bush administration, carried out many criminal covert operations for the CIA. And that's another thing I'd love to just tell you about, so many of them, the groundwork for NAFTA, for example, the global education system, which, as I said, is an enormous passion of mine. There's so many aspects that need to be addressed, but I would encourage you, please look at Transformation of America for that information, because Transformation of America was originally written for U.S. congressional intelligence oversight, which means that the facts in there have to be validatable, backed up, and the documentation, the proofs on it are so strong that it's an important bit of information that's not the easiest to read because of the way it was written, but nevertheless, it certainly outlines the covert operations, the fact that the CIA was involved in the so-called war on drugs, which was no more than the CIA eliminating their competition worldwide. Well, they turned our streets into a bloodbath. Since we're here in California, I've got to make mention of one little aspect of this so-called war on drugs that disturbs me very, 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 very deeply. I was exposed to many drugs under mind control. Since my sexuality had been enhanced, the operations that I was used in oftentimes involved some kind of sexual perversion, sexual activity. Oftentimes, compromising videos were actually being filmed through the little lens in the ceiling. Because these criminals in control of our country and our information and our technology do not trust each other either. So they blackmail each other and they keep each other in check through those kind of aspects. And that was one more part that I was aware of and exposed to. Well, many of these criminals used various forms of drugs, particularly cocaine, and heroin at times, which I knew would be George Bush's drug of choice because of all the criminals that I've been exposed to throughout my victimization. He has absolutely no question about it. The most influential, high-up perpetrator of all of them. He's run our country through so many administrations. It's got to stop somewhere. He ran our country. Well, first he began with the United Nations. Then he headed our CIA. Then he ran our country through the Reagan administration, through his own, through the Clinton administration, and now look who's in office. From everything that I know and all of my perceptions, the administration that we have in place now is absolutely 100% totally controlled by George Bush and the people that he's associated with in this New World Order effort. But it's my experience that George Bush's choice of drugs was in the heroin, and I knew that there would be a larger influx of heroin into this country, although cocaine is certainly still very, very prevalent. And I know that the CIA and many prominent people were involved in that black budget funding mechanism as well. Of all the drugs I was exposed to, though, there was one that was strictly forbidden, and that was marijuana. Marijuana is strictly forbidden because the effects on the brain actually open those neuron pathways so that any compartmentalization of memory, of any kind of trauma or any kind of so-called secret that's compartmentalized in the brain actually begins to erode. Like what happens to people at the age of 30 when their electrochemical changes happen and their mind expands. That is why they don't want to have even medical marijuana for people who have need and proven need for it. I think it's I'm not standing here to be pro-marijuana at all. I am here to tell you I am extremely anti-marijuana because I know why this anti-marijuana campaign is out there and their efforts to control all of us by making sure that that particular drug is controlled so that no one in any kind of position would have free thought. Now, I'm not saying that is any kind of solution whatsoever to mind control because I'm telling you this is absolutely, I do not believe it is. I think at best it's a Band-Aid. What we need is a solution, and the solution is awareness. Knowledge is our only defense. Awareness is our solution, not marijuana. But nevertheless, since we're in California, I absolutely had to make mention of that. I'm pretty disturbed over the fact that the federal government's making so many efforts to stop it. My daughter Kelly was exposed to the most high-tech form of mind control as of 1980. She was born into it, and she was taken to various military and NASA installations for harmonic mind control programming literally since birth, before her brain even had a chance to form. And in essence, the key that locked the doors to her mind needs to be used to unlock it. But the government will not release the technological antidote to a problem they refuse to admit exists, and that's mind control. What Kelly experienced was horrific, and today she's having a very, very difficult time with this ongoing administration. She had hope. She's 21 years old now, and did have the capacity to at least hope that people would wake up in time to make a difference for her and so many other children who are out there in need of help. It's just not happening fast enough. From a personal point of view, from the people that I've seen that are affected, and people like my daughter who need help, that I look at different cases throughout the country that have happened and the events that have happened. I wish people could wake up faster. It would have to be retroactive, I guess, to be fast enough, so that we'd understand what what the Oklahoma City bombing was all about, what the JonBenet Ramsey case is all about, what's happening with the school shootings. What was Waco really all about? So many things have been happening in our society for so long. Please take the information that I've been telling you about trauma and apply it to this kind of a situation. Those are traumas that affect us all. Anytime a trauma occurs that affects all of us like that, we're all more highly suggestible, more easily led, more receptive to losing more of our rights, and it happens every time. In 1988, Mark rescued my daughter Kelly and I, and I'm extremely fortunate that he did. I was 30 years old. I was there. I was just right at that age where mind-controlled slaves like myself are eliminated, and my death was imminent because of the electrochemical changes that happen that allow for an opening of neuron pathways in the brain. I was in deep trouble. My daughter's fate would have been worse than death if Mark hadn't come in and rescued Kelly and I in 1988. He took us to the safety and serenity of Alaska. I believed I died and gone to heaven, actually, because I was so close to death at that time anyway. But it took a little while before I realized even how old I was and just how close I was to that age of elimination. When Mark rescued Kelly and I thought I was still 24 years old. If I could think at all, that was just pretty much my standard answer. I hadn't been able to see beyond it until he showed me my driver's license. You know, I mean, I guess I should have looked at that, but I couldn't think to do any of that on my own. I had only followed orders, robotically carried out instructions for well over a decade, just as I had been conditioned for. I certainly couldn't think to trust Mark. There's no way. I could only sense that he was someone that I could trust because just like a blind person would develop better hearing, I developed heightened senses to make up for my lack of ability to think. And people who abuse children oftentimes abuse animals, and everybody I knew was abusive to animals. I love animals. They're so precious and they're so innocent. I really love animals, but they were abusive to him, which was, again, just an added trauma base to everything else that was happening. In Mark's case, he had some raccoons that he'd rescued. They loved him. I'd see him hugging him. And I could sense that if the animals could sense he was worthy of trust, it's as though I could sense that as well, and it would be okay. When he rescued Kelly and I, he even rescued the farm animals off the farm that Alex Houston had in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, and took the dogs and the cows and the guineas and chickens and the horses. We just took all the animals out of there as well because they certainly didn't need to be abused by Alex Houston the way that they were. And Mark had the insight to be able to see what was happening and to stand up and make a profound difference in what he saw. I'm extremely fortunate for that. Kelly and I felt safe for the first time. We felt love for the first time. And memories of the past began flooding our mind screen. We began to remember what we were supposed to forget. In Kelly's case, she had been groomed for espionage from infancy. She had a program in place that she would go into respiratory failure and die with the secrets before she could think to reveal them. This is a programming method that's very common in intelligence these days. When spies used to have to take the old cyanide pill, if they were in a torturous situation or were about to reveal something, that's not necessary anymore. It's automatically they'll either go into respiratory failure or circulatory failure. We look at special forces and they have, quote, no time to bleed. which is a program that's put in on such a deep level. Because when you have sleep, food, and water deprivation in association with trauma, the mind is receptive to accepting information, which when put in on a hypnotic or a harmonic level goes in very, very deep, reaches so deep into the subconscious that it can actually influence our breathing and our circulatory system. If we think about that secret that's been suppressed from us, can you imagine what that's going to do for us medically when we realize we have the capacity within us for that kind of healing? It's very significant. It's going to absolutely revolutionize and evolutionize the whole medical community. I'm real excited at the prospect of what can be done with it. But I'm deeply disturbed over the fact that they had the respiratory failure program in place on my daughter. And as soon as she began to remember, she went into respiratory failure. When she went into respiratory failure, she was put in an intensive care unit at Humana Hospital in Anchorage, Alaska, where she would not respond to any conventional medical treatment. But she began to respond to psychological and psychiatric intervention of a psychiatrist who first diagnosed her with multiple personality disorder, as it was still called back then, with active mind control programming. Not everybody's asleep as to the reality of mind control, and my daughter was fortunate that at least someone could see and recognize what was happening to her. I was still completely dissociative of the past. I still didn't know what we were running from, who it was that was firing at us, what was happening and why. I didn't know. I only knew that it was something I better remember real fast for my daughter's sake, as well as our own safety and our own survival. Of course, those memories are in our book, Transformation of America. Kelly, unfortunately, through a series of very criminal events, ended up in the custody of the state of Tennessee, which was a primary abuse-based force during the Reagan-Bush administration. And she was put in through that system that's eroded our justice system so horrible for so long. And the judge presiding over her case was approached by the district attorney, who was very much concerned for Kelly and I. And he told him, he said, "You're in violation of this law, and this law, and this law, and this law." And the judge said, "Laws do not apply in this case for reasons of national security." It's very rare that this is said in open court. It's usually said in closed chambers. This was said in open court with record of it. This opened doors to ultimately on our whole legal situation, but it did not help Kelly or free her from the custody of the state of Tennessee, where she stayed right up until she became of legal age. As fast as she became of legal age, she went into a safe environment that was kind of just a little holding center where we were going to be able to make a profound difference for her. Because when she's with me, just my presence triggers memories of the past and what she had been through, the highly influential perpetrators that she's been exposed to, which include George Bush, with proof and evidence, and she's not the only one, and the evidence is overwhelming. And her exposure to George Bush Jr., who at the time of our victimization was learning the ropes and following in Daddy's footsteps and making sure that certain things were in place, not by his own free thought or his own creativity on making sure things were right, but rather by following orders robotically and doing exactly as he was told, which I'm sure he's still doing today. But the fact of the matter remains, my daughter Kelly was exposed to him. So as fast as Kelly had that little peek at freedom, that little peek at being able to maybe hope for a future, George Bush went into office, Jr., supposedly. And it's had a very, very adverse effect on Kelly, and she's not been herself since. And I'm deeply concerned for her welfare and hope that people will wake up and we can make enough of a difference, not only for her, but for so many others that are in the same kind of position under the control of these criminals who continue to run our country right into the New World Order controls. I'm deeply concerned for Kelly's future and whether or not she'll even have one. When Mark and I were speaking out in 1992, we were out in the Marin County area, and a woman, the whole community came out. This was out in Santa Rosa and back then, because of Michael Aquino's influence on the Marin County Daycare Center. The whole community turned out, and it was a very moving event. Our book hadn't even been released at all. We'd been teaching law enforcement and mental health about mind control and that recovery is possible. Back then, I talked to so many psychiatrists who were actually earning educational credits learning how to recover and what the recovery processes are for the numerous victims that they were seeing coming through their offices. I spoke to so many that I believe I've been looked at by more psychiatrists than anyone ever has, and boy, man, they have really been kept in the dark for a long time. They're beginning to open their eyes to the fact that the information was suppressed through the American Psychiatric Association back when Dr. Ewing Cameron, who worked directly under the CIA, was caught using mind control in Montreal, Canada, on patients, was very much instrumental in suppressing pertinent facts on mind-brain function, as well as what mind control was all about, right from the onset. So mental health really, really had a long way to go. They still have a long way to go, but they have since reorganized. They've got some reorganization going on through the International Society for the Study of Dissociation. They've renamed multiple personality disorder to dissociative identity disorder, and it is widely known that recovery from the most horrific robotic forms of mind control is certainly possible. And that was an enormous accomplishment that Mark and I were making back in 1992, as well as to the border guards who were seeing so many mind control slaves hauling cocaine across border, especially Mexico, and wondering why every time they made an arrest that the whole thing was covered up for so-called reasons of national security. And they wanted some answers too. So we were speaking out to them as well. That was just about all we had done back at that point in time when we ended up in Marin County, speaking to the whole community of people who had turned out to hear what we had to say and to know that hope was a very, very real possibility. Recovery was certainly probable. And there was a woman, I'll never forget, who came up to me out of the crowd. She had 3 children that were being used in mind control. She had lost 3 children through a corrupt court system because of Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino's involvement, the fact that national security was slapped on the whole thing, that Satanism was very much a part of it. And this woman was in her last days of dying from cancer. She had no hair, and she came up and cried, and she said, "I can die in peace now because people will know, and it will help my children." That's a long time ago that woman had that kind of hope and shared my hope for my own daughter, that people would wake up in time. Well, it certainly is time that people wake up. We need to realize not only that aspect, but one other part as well. We hear so much about the aliens and all that are happening, alien mind control and everything else. It's very much used as a trauma base for mind control to render people totally helpless, to feel like they can't make a difference. Realize that mind control extends into this area. Realize that the small handful of criminals in control of our country and our information and our technology have kept it suppressed for so long that when it does come out, it does look alien to all of us. It's the most strong consideration that I would encourage each and every one of you to realize there is no boxed information. There is no easy answer. There is no absolute on any of it. And I'm not saying the aliens don't exist, because it's not that simple. My experience with George Bush included him doing the lizard projection thing, which at that time he actually used a harmonic generator to do it. But why did he choose that theme? Why did he have to do? Are they losing their ability? Did they ever have an ability? But are they losing their ability to be able to transform because they're in this physical plane? What is the difference on that? I have a lot of questions. The criminals that I was exposed to talked about aliens and the alien technologies and aspects of it quite frequently, most often in terms of interdimensional aspects and time travel. Oftentimes referring to aliens more as us in the future, technology being from our own future. I don't think that's all of the answer either. Again, it doesn't fit in a box, folks. We've got to expand our minds. Just like I had to expand out of those little compartments in my brain, we all need to expand our thought. I only had in those little compartments my own experience, and that's all I could see while I was under program or carrying out from that little tiny area. It was a narrow, narrow vision. And I see so many people operating through that same narrow vision today based on what they were told on TV or what they've been educated in school, when in fact so much pertinent information has been suppressed that we need to begin to look beyond what we think we know. Are there lizards? I don't know. It wasn't my experience. But I'm certainly not going to say, I know it all. But I am going to tell you that these criminals oftentimes talked about the transdimensional aspects and the time travel part, and it's something that I think we need to look at and consider, as well as the other possibilities that are out there. They know that if we don't have the answers, we're afraid, and if we're afraid, we're more easily controlled. We have nothing to be afraid of. There's no fear involved in this whatsoever. There's nothing new under the sun. With all that you think you know, and all that I've talked about today, this is just one more piece of a whole overall puzzle of a much bigger picture and a much bigger effort that's happening in our world. But it is our world, and we do have the ability to affect it. It is not beyond our realm to affect. All we need to do is open our eyes and raise awareness. 95% of the people want to be led by 5%. It only takes 3% of that 5% to make a positive difference, not only for my daughter, not only for that woman's children, the woman who is dying of cancer, not only for those in the military, not only for, the poor Vietnam vets that have just longed for understanding for so long, wanted someone to know the horror of what they experienced, the manipulation of the minds. Our school children, what's happening to them in the education system? These are areas that we can affect positive change and move into an area that is going to allow all of us to go into self-healing. Get rid of doctors. Get rid of lawyers. We don't need any of that stuff. We don't need a lawyer to tell us what the truth is. The best lawyers are those who know how to manipulate the minds of the people. So we need to be aware of mind control, how it's affecting society and all of us, and begin to take back control of our world and control of our lives. Spread the word. Thank you very much.